The email was simple: 3 paragraphs, 47 words, and 1 attachment. But when I hit send at exactly 9:47 a.m. on that Tuesday morning, I watched $17 million evaporate from TechFlow Solutions' valuation in real time. The CEO who had stolen my life's work, who had built his empire on my innovation while treating me like I was invisible, saw his dreams of going public crumble faster than a house of cards in a hurricane. They called me vindictive. They called me bitter. But as I watched David Chen's face turn white as paper during that emergency board meeting, I knew I had finally done what I should have done years ago. I had taken back what was mine. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and I used to believe that hard work and talent were enough. I used to think that if you put your head down, delivered exceptional results, and stayed loyal to your company, recognition would naturally follow. I spent 3 years at TechFlow Solutions, working 70-hour weeks, sacrificing weekends, missing family gatherings, all because I believed I was building something meaningful. I was the senior AI engineer who developed the revolutionary algorithm that would eventually make TechFlow worth hundreds of millions of dollars. But when the IPO paperwork was filed, when the investor presentations were made, when the media interviews were given, my name was nowhere to be found. Instead, it was David Chen, our CEO, who stood in front of cameras claiming he had developed the breakthrough technology that would transform business automation forever. The morning everything changed started like any other Tuesday in Austin. I arrived at our office on the 25th floor of Frost Tower before 7 a.m., just as the Texas sun was painting the downtown skyline in shades of orange and gold. The office was still empty except for the security guard and a few early birds from the sales team. I loved these quiet morning hours when I could focus without interruption, when the constant buzz of startup energy hadn't yet filled the open-plan workspace with its chaotic symphony of phone calls, meetings, and the endless ping of Slack notifications. I had been working on what would become Flow AI for over 2 years. The project started as a simple automation tool, but I knew it could be something revolutionary. The traditional approach to business process automation was clunky, requiring extensive manual programming for each workflow. But I had developed something different, something that used neural network architecture to learn and adapt to any business process automatically. The system could reduce processing time by 85% while maintaining 99.7% accuracy. It was, without exaggeration, a breakthrough that could change how every company in the world handled their operations. That Tuesday morning, I was putting the finishing touches on the final optimization that would make our system ready for enterprise deployment. The code was elegant, efficient, and unlike anything that existed in the market. I had spent countless nights debugging, testing, and refining every aspect of the algorithm. My apartment in South Austin had become a second office, with whiteboards covering every wall, filled with equations and flowcharts that most people would mistake for abstract art. As I worked, I could hear the office slowly coming to life around me. Jennifer Walsh from marketing arrived with her usual dramatic flair, her heels clicking against the polished concrete floors as she made her grand entrance. Marcus Thompson, our CTO and David's college roommate, shuffled in looking like he had rolled out of bed 5 minutes earlier, which he probably had. These were the people I worked alongside every day, the team that was supposed to be building the future together. But something felt different that morning. There was an energy in the air, whispered conversations that stopped when I walked by, meaningful glances exchanged between the leadership team. I had learned to read the office dynamics over my 3 years there, and my instincts were telling me something big was happening. When you work in a startup, you develop a sixth sense for these things. The sudden closed-door meetings, the way executives lower their voices when discussing certain topics, the mysterious calendar invites that somehow never include the people actually doing the work. Around 10 a.m., David Chen called an all-hands meeting. This wasn't unusual in itself, David loved his company-wide announcements, his moments to play the visionary leader in front of his employees. He had this way of speaking that made everything sound revolutionary, even when he was just announcing a new coffee machine in the break room. But today was different. Today, he stood in front of our assembled team with the kind of barely contained excitement that told me something major was about to be revealed. David was everything you would expect from a tech CEO in 2025. 38 years old, always dressed in expensive jeans and designer t-shirts that probably cost more than most people's rent. He had perfected the casual billionaire look, complete, with limited edition sneakers and a watch that could fund a small startup. His dark hair was always perfectly styled in that calculated, messy way that takes significant effort to achieve. He possessed the kind of confidence that comes from never having been told no, never having faced real consequences for his actions. He began the meeting with his usual preamble about disruption and innovation, about how TechFlow was positioned to change the world. But then he said something that made my blood run cold. After 3 years of intensive research and development, I'm excited to announce that TechFlow Solutions will be filing for an initial public offering. The room erupted in cheers and applause. Stock options suddenly seemed more valuable. Early employee packages took on new meaning, and everyone started calculating what their shares might be worth. But David wasn't finished. The foundation of our IPO will be Flow AI, the revolutionary artificial intelligence system that I developed to automate complex business workflows. This breakthrough technology represents years of my personal research into neural network architecture and machine learning optimization. He continued speaking, describing my algorithm, my innovation, my sleepless nights of coding, but attributing everything to himself. He talked about the technical challenges he had overcome, the eureka moments that had led to the breakthrough, the countless hours he had spent perfecting the system. I felt like the world had tilted off its axis. The words hit me like physical blows, each claim of ownership cutting deeper than the last. I looked around the room, expecting someone to speak up, to correct this obvious mistake. But everyone was nodding along, impressed by their CEO's technical genius, amazed by his hands-on involvement in the development process. Marcus Thompson, who knew exactly who had written every line of code, sat in the front row beaming with pride at his friend's accomplishment. Jennifer Walsh was already taking notes for what would undoubtedly become a marketing campaign celebrating David's innovation. The meeting continued for another 20 minutes, but I heard none of it. My mind was racing, trying to process what had just happened. How could David stand in front of the entire company and claim credit for work that everyone knew I had done? How could he look me in the eye and pretend that the algorithm that would make him millions of dollars had somehow materialized from his own genius? The technical specifications he was rattling off, the implementation details he was explaining, they were lifted directly from my documentation, from my presentations, from my code comments. When the meeting finally ended, I remained in my chair as the room emptied around me. Colleagues patted David on the back, congratulating him on his breakthrough. A few people approached me with excited comments about how amazing it must be to work so closely with such a brilliant CEO, how lucky I was to be part of implementing his vision. Each well-meaning comment felt like salt in an open wound. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Lisa Kim, one of the junior developers who had worked with me closely on the project, lingered behind. She was 26 years old, fresh out of Stanford with a computer science degree, and the kind of idealistic enthusiasm that I remembered having when I first entered the tech industry. Lisa had spent months pair programming with me, watching me develop the core algorithms, learning from my approach to solving complex technical challenges. "Sarah," she said quietly, glancing around to make sure we were alone. "That was your work he was describing, wasn't it?" Her voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried the weight of shared knowledge. Lisa had been there for the late-night debugging sessions. She had seen me struggling with the mathematical proofs that made the algorithm possible. She had witnessed the moment when I finally cracked the optimization problem that had been haunting me for months. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. The confirmation hanging in the air between us felt both validating and devastating. At least someone had noticed. At least someone knew the truth. But what did that matter when the person with the power to set the record straight was the same person who had just stolen credit for my life's work? "What are you going to do?" Lisa asked, her young face filled with the kind of righteous indignation that hadn't yet been beaten down by corporate politics and power dynamics. I wished I had an answer for her. I wished I could say that I was going to march into David's office and demand recognition, that I was going to email the entire company, setting the record straight, that I was going to fight back immediately and decisively. But the truth was, I felt paralyzed. 3 years of being the good employee, the team player, the woman who didn't make waves, had conditioned me to doubt my own instincts. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe David's claims were somehow legitimate. Maybe there was context I was missing. The rest of that day passed in a blur of confused conversations and mounting realization. I tried to focus on my work, but every few minutes someone would stop by my desk to talk about David's exciting announcement. Marketing began crafting press releases about the CEO's technical innovation. The legal team started preparing patent applications with David listed as the primary inventor. Brian Rodriguez from finance was already running projections for the IPO based on the strength of David's proprietary algorithm. By the time I left the office that evening, I felt like I was living in some parallel universe where truth had become completely optional. I drove home through Austin's rush hour traffic in a daze, my mind cycling through everything that had happened. My small apartment near South Lamar felt like a sanctuary, but even there I couldn't escape the reality of what David had done. The whiteboards on my walls, covered with my handwriting, told the real story of Flow AI's development. Every equation, every optimization, every breakthrough moment was documented in my own hand. I called Emma Parker, my best friend since college, and the one person I could trust to give me honest perspective. Emma worked as a senior engineer at CloudVision, one of TechFlow's main competitors, and she understood the tech industry's dynamics better than anyone I knew. We had maintained our friendship despite working for competing companies, bonding over shared experiences of being women in a male-dominated field. "Emma, I need to talk to someone who won't think I'm crazy," I said, as soon as she picked up the phone. "What happened? You sound terrible." I told her everything. About David's announcement, about his claims of having developed Flow AI personally, about the way he had described technical details that could only have come from my documentation. Emma listened without interruption, occasionally making small sounds of disbelief and anger. "Sarah, that's not just unethical, it's probably illegal," she said when I finished. "You have documentation proving you developed that algorithm, right? Code commits, design documents, email communications?" "Of course I do. I have everything. But what am I supposed to do with it? David is the CEO. The board trusts him completely. Half the executive team consists of his college friends. Who's going to believe me over him?" Emma was quiet for a moment. "You know what this reminds me of? Remember in college when Professor Williams tried to take credit for your distributed systems project? You didn't let him get away with it then." She was right. During my senior year at MIT, I had developed an innovative approach to distributed computing that my advisor had tried to claim as his own work. I had fought back then, presenting my case to the department head with evidence and documentation. It had been messy and uncomfortable, but I had won. My name had appeared on the published paper, my contribution had been recognized, and Professor Williams had been quietly reprimanded. But this felt different. This wasn't academia, where intellectual honesty was supposed to matter. This was corporate America, where loyalty and hierarchy often trumped truth. David wasn't just my advisor, he was my boss, and he controlled my career, my livelihood, my professional future. I don't know if I have the energy to fight this, I admitted to Emma. Maybe I should just find a new job. There are plenty of companies that would value my skills. Sarah Michelle Mitchell, Emma said, using my full name the way she did when she was about to give me a lecture. You are one of the most brilliant engineers I know. You revolutionized business process automation. You created something that could change how every company in the world operates. And you're going to let some privileged asshole steal credit for your work and profit from your innovation? That's not the woman I went to college with. After we hung up, I sat on my couch staring at my laptop screen. The TechFlow employee portal was open, showing the company directory with David's name at the top, his title listed as CEO and Chief AI Architect. That last part was new. Apparently, stealing credit for my work had earned him a promotion in his own mind. I scrolled through the recent company announcements, reading the excited reactions from employees who genuinely believed their CEO was a technical genius. The next morning, I decided to approach Marcus Thompson directly. As CTO, Marcus had been involved in every technical decision related to Flow AI's development. He had attended my presentations, reviewed my code, and approved my architectural choices. If anyone could set the record straight, it was him. I found Marcus in his office, which looked like a stereotype of a tech executive's workspace. Multiple monitors displayed various dashboards and metrics. Energy drink cans were scattered across his desk, and a collection of startup t-shirts hung on a clothing rack in the corner. Marcus was 36 years old, with prematurely gray hair and the soft physique of someone who spent more time in meetings than writing code. "Hey Sarah, great meeting yesterday, right?" he said without looking up from his screen. David's announcement has everyone excited. The IPO timeline is aggressive, but I think we can make it happen. Marcus, I need to talk to you about something important. I closed his office door and took a seat across from his desk. David's claims about developing Flow AI, we both know. That's not accurate. Marcus finally looked at me, his expression shifting from casual friendliness to something more guarded. What do you mean? I mean, I developed that algorithm. I wrote every line of code. I solved every technical challenge. I created the architecture that makes it work. You know this. You've been involved in the project from the beginning. Marcus leaned back in his chair, suddenly looking uncomfortable. Sarah, I think you might be misunderstanding David's role in the project. He provided the vision, the strategic direction. He identified the market need and specified the requirements. That's innovation too. I stared at him in disbelief. Marcus, David barely understands how the algorithm works. Remember last month when he asked me to explain the difference between supervised and unsupervised learning? Remember when he suggested, we use blockchain to make the AI more secure? You and I both laughed about it after the meeting. Look, Sarah, Marcus said, his voice taking on a patronizing tone that made my skin crawl. You're a talented engineer. No one disputes that. But there's a difference between implementing someone's vision and actually creating it. David saw the big picture. He understood the market opportunity. He directed the development process. That's what leadership looks like in a tech company. The conversation continued for another 10 minutes, but it became clear that Marcus was going to support David's version of events regardless of the truth. Their friendship went back 15 years, to their undergraduate days at University of Texas. Marcus owed his CTO position to David's loyalty, and he wasn't going to jeopardize that relationship for the sake of giving credit where credit was due. As I left his office, I felt a crushing sense of isolation. The two people with the most technical knowledge about Flow AI's development had both decided that truth was less important than maintaining their existing power structure. David had the charisma and the title, so he deserved the credit. I had the talent and the work, but that apparently wasn't enough. The following weeks were surreal. I watched as David gave interview after interview, describing his breakthrough in artificial intelligence. Tech blogs wrote glowing profiles of the CEO who was revolutionizing business automation. Venture capitalists praised his technical vision and hands-on approach to product development. TechFlow's valuation began climbing as investors competed to get in on the ground floor of what was being called the next major AI breakthrough. Meanwhile, I continued working on Flow AI's implementation, fixing bugs and optimizing performance, while David took credit for every improvement. During team meetings, he would casually reference technical decisions as if he had made them himself. He started using terminology and concepts that I knew he had learned from my documentation, speaking with the confidence of someone who genuinely believed his own fabrications. The most painful part was watching how the company culture shifted around David's new narrative. Employees who had previously come to me with technical questions began directing them to David instead. Junior developers started treating me like I was lucky to be working on such an important project, rather than recognizing that I had created it. My contributions were reframed as helping to implement David's vision, rather than being acknowledged as the core innovation that made everything possible. Lisa Kim was the only person who seemed to recognize the injustice of the situation. She would often stop by my desk with questions that felt like coded messages of support. "Sarah, can you explain how you approach the neural network optimization?" she would ask, emphasizing the word "you" in a way that acknowledged my ownership of the work. These small gestures of recognition kept me sane during those difficult weeks. One afternoon, as I was debugging a performance issue in the Flow AI deployment system, Jennifer Walsh approached my desk with her usual artificial enthusiasm. Jennifer was 32 years old, with perfect blonde hair and the kind of polished appearance that suggested significant investment in personal branding. She had joined TechFlow 8 months earlier from a marketing agency that specialized in tech startups, and she had quickly established herself as David's most loyal supporter. "Sarah, I'm working on the press strategy for our IPO announcement, and I wanted to get some quotes from the development team about what it's like to work with David on such groundbreaking technology." I looked up from my code, incredulous at the request. "Jennifer, you want me to give you quotes about working with David on technology that I developed?" "Well, yes. I think it would be really powerful to have the team talk about David's hands-on leadership style, his technical brilliance, his ability to guide complex engineering projects. Investors love to hear about CEOs who are deeply involved in product development." The request was so absurd that I almost laughed. Jennifer wanted me to publicly praise David for stealing my work, to contribute to the narrative that would help him profit from my innovation. The sheer audacity of it was breathtaking. "I don't think I'm the right person for those quotes," I said, turning back to my screen. "Oh, come on, Sarah. This is a team effort. David's success is everyone's success. When the IPO happens, we all benefit from the company's increased valuation." That evening, I stayed late in the office, long after everyone else had gone home. The cleaning crew worked quietly around me as I sat at my desk, staring at the Flow AI codebase on my monitor. Thousands of lines of code, representing months of intensive work, solving problems that no one else had been able to crack. The algorithm that was going to make David Chen famous and wealthy, that was going to transform TechFlow from a small startup into a publicly traded company, that was going to establish him as one of Austin's most successful tech entrepreneurs. I opened up the patent application that the legal team had prepared. David's name was listed as the primary inventor, with Marcus as a secondary contributor. My name appeared in the acknowledgments section, thanked for my valuable assistance in the implementation process. It was like being credited as a research assistant for discovering a cure for cancer. The next morning brought news that sent shockwaves through the office. Dr. Robert Hayes, one of Silicon Valley's most respected venture capitalists, had agreed to lead TechFlow's Series B funding round. Hayes was known for his technical expertise and his ability to identify breakthrough technologies before they became mainstream. His investment would not only provide TechFlow with the capital needed for rapid expansion, but it would also serve as a stamp of approval that would make the eventual IPO much more attractive to institutional investors. David called another all-hands meeting to announce the news. He stood in front of the assembled team, practically glowing with excitement, as he described the opportunities that Hayes' investment would create. Dr. Hayes was particularly impressed with Flow AI's technical innovation, David said, his voice carrying the pride of someone who genuinely believed he deserved the praise. He called it the most significant advancement in business process automation that he's seen in over a decade. After the meeting, I found myself in the break room with Tom Bradley, TechFlow's investor relations manager. Tom was a quiet, thoughtful man in his early 40s who had joined the company specifically to help manage the IPO process. He had worked at several successful startups during his career, and he understood the complexities of taking a company public better than anyone else on the team. "It's exciting news about Dr. Hayes," Tom said as he poured himself a cup of coffee. "His due diligence process is notoriously thorough. If he's investing, it means he really believes in the technology." "What kind of due diligence does he typically do?" I asked, suddenly curious about how these investment decisions were made. "Oh, he's extremely hands-on. He doesn't just look at financial projections and market analysis. He digs deep into the technical details, interviews key personnel, reviews code architecture, examines patent portfolios. Hayes has a PhD in computer science from Stanford, so he actually understands the technology he's investing in. That's what makes his endorsement so valuable." An idea began forming in my mind. If Dr. Hayes was as thorough as Tom described, if he really did examine the technical details and interview key personnel, then perhaps there was an opportunity to ensure he understood exactly who had developed the technology he was investing in. Maybe the truth would matter to someone who had built his reputation on identifying genuine innovation. That night, I began preparing a comprehensive documentation package that told the real story of Flow AI's development. I gathered every piece of evidence I could find. Initial design documents with my name and timestamp, email threads showing my technical leadership, code commits demonstrating my contributions, presentation slides from my architecture reviews, even photos of the whiteboards in my apartment covered with algorithm sketches. The evidence was overwhelming and irrefutable. Anyone with technical expertise who reviewed it would understand immediately that I had been the driving force behind Flow AI's creation. But I still hesitated to act. Taking this step would mean declaring war on David and the entire TechFlow leadership team. It would mean risking my job, my reputation, and my future in the Austin tech community. David had connections throughout the industry, and he wasn't the type of person who would forget or forgive someone who challenged his authority. If I moved against him and failed, it could destroy my career. Emma sensed my hesitation when we met for coffee at Grind Coffee, our usual spot near South First. The cafe was busy with the typical Austin crowd of remote workers, freelancers, and startup employees, all typing intensely on their laptops while fueled by artisanal coffee and ambitious dreams. "You're overthinking this," Emma said after I explained my plan. "You have all the evidence you need. Dr. Hayes is known for his integrity. If you present him with the truth, he'll listen." But what if he doesn't? What if David convinces him that I'm just a disgruntled employee trying to cause trouble? What if the entire investment falls through because of the controversy? Emma leaned forward, her expression serious. "Sarah, let me ask you something. 5 years from now, when David is worth hundreds of millions of dollars from taking Flow AI public, when he's giving keynote speeches at tech conferences about his innovative AI algorithm, when he's being featured on magazine covers as one of the most successful entrepreneurs of his generation, how are you going to feel knowing that all of that success is built on your work?" The question hit me like a physical blow. I had been so focused on the immediate risks of speaking up that I hadn't fully considered the long-term consequences of staying silent. David wasn't going to stop at claiming credit for Flow AI. This IPO was just the beginning of what would undoubtedly become a highly successful career built on my innovation. He would use the reputation and wealth generated by my algorithm to fund new ventures, to attract top talent, to establish himself as a thought leader in artificial intelligence. Meanwhile, I would remain in the shadows, knowing that I had created something revolutionary but never receiving recognition for it. "You're right," I said finally. "I can't let this continue. Even if it destroys my career, even if it causes problems for the company, I have to try." The next step was figuring out how to approach Dr. Hayes without alerting David to my intentions. I knew that Hayes would be visiting TechFlow's office for a final due diligence session before finalizing his investment. According to Tom Bradley, this visit would include technical presentations, team interviews, and a comprehensive review of Flow AI's architecture and capabilities. I volunteered to participate in the technical presentations, positioning myself as someone who could provide detailed insights into Flow AI's implementation. David was happy to include me, seeing it as an opportunity to demonstrate his hands-on leadership and technical team's capabilities. He had no idea that I was planning to use the opportunity to expose his deception. The day of Dr. Hayes' visit arrived with the kind of nervous energy that pervaded TechFlow whenever important investors were in the building. The office had been cleaned and organized, marketing materials were strategically placed, and everyone was dressed slightly more professionally than usual. David wore his most expensive casual outfit, the carefully crafted look of a successful tech CEO who was approachable but sophisticated. Dr. Robert Hayes was not what I had expected. He was 62 years old, with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses that gave him the appearance of a distinguished professor rather than a venture capitalist. His questions during the technical presentation were precise and insightful, demonstrating genuine understanding of the algorithmic challenges that Flow AI had solved. When David attempted to gloss over technical details with high-level buzzwords, Hayes would drill down with specific questions that revealed the depth of his expertise. "The neural network optimization you've described is quite sophisticated," Dr. Hayes said during David's presentation. "Can you walk me through the mathematical proof that demonstrates why your approach achieves superior performance compared to existing methods?" I watched David's face carefully as he processed the question. This was exactly the kind of technical detail that he couldn't fake his way through. The mathematical proof that Dr. Hayes was asking about had taken me 3 weeks to develop, involving complex linear algebra and optimization theory that required deep understanding of machine learning principles. "That's a great question," David said, employing the classic stalling technique of repeating the question to buy time. "The mathematical foundations are quite complex, and I think it would be more valuable to focus on the practical applications and market impact. But if you're interested in the detailed proofs, Sarah here was instrumental in helping me document the technical specifications." My heart pounded as all eyes in the room turned to me. This was my moment. I could play along with David's narrative, provide the technical details he couldn't, and allow him to continue taking credit for my work. Or I could tell the truth and face whatever consequences followed. "Actually," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, "I'd be happy to explain the mathematical proof. I developed it as part of my work creating the Flow AI algorithm." The room fell silent. David's expression shifted from confident to concerned as he realized what was happening. Dr. Hayes leaned forward with interest, clearly intrigued by the subtle tension that had just entered the conversation. "Please go ahead," Dr. Hayes said. For the next 20 minutes, I walked through the technical details of Flow AI's development, explaining the algorithmic innovations, the optimization techniques, and the mathematical foundations that made the system possible. I could feel David's growing anger as I spoke, but I also noticed Dr. Hayes taking detailed notes and asking follow-up questions that demonstrated his understanding and appreciation of the work. "This is fascinating," Dr. Hayes said when I finished. "The approach you've described represents a significant advancement in neural network efficiency. How long did it take you to develop this algorithm?" "About 18 months of intensive research and development," I replied. The breakthrough came when I realized that traditional optimization approaches were focusing on the wrong variables. Dr. Hayes nodded thoughtfully, then turned to David. "And your role in this development process was?" David's face had turned red with barely contained fury, but he managed to maintain his composure. "As CEO, I provided the strategic vision and overall direction for the project. I identified the market opportunity and specified the requirements that Sarah and the team needed to meet." The rest of the meeting continued with increasing tension. David tried to regain control of the narrative, but Dr. Hayes continued asking technical questions that only I could answer with authority. By the time we finished, it was clear that Dr. Hayes understood exactly who had developed Flow AI and who was taking credit for it. After Dr. Hayes left, David stormed into his office and slammed the door. Within minutes, Marcus Thompson appeared at my desk with a grim expression. "Sarah, David wants to see you immediately." The walk to David's office felt like a death march. I knew that my decision to speak truthfully during Dr. Hayes' visit had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. David wasn't going to forgive what he would undoubtedly see as betrayal and insubordination. When I entered his office, David was standing with his back to me, looking out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the Austin skyline. His hands were clenched behind his back, and I could sense the rage radiating from his posture. "Close the door and sit down," he said without turning around. I did as instructed, my heart racing as I prepared for the confrontation I had been dreading for weeks. 3 years, David said, finally turning to face me. 3 years I've invested in you, Sarah. I gave you opportunities, resources, the freedom to work on cutting-edge technology. I trusted you to be part of this team, to support this company's growth and success. He walked behind his desk but remained standing, using his height and position to establish dominance in the conversation. "And how do you repay that trust? By trying to sabotage our most important investor meeting. By undermining my credibility in front of someone whose support could transform this company." "David, I didn't sabotage anything. I answered Dr. Hayes' technical questions honestly." "Honestly?" David's voice rose with indignation. "You made it sound like you single-handedly developed Flow AI, like I had nothing to do with its creation. Do you have any idea how that makes me look? Do you understand what you've potentially cost this company?" I took a deep breath, knowing that this conversation would determine my future at TechFlow and possibly in the Austin tech community. "David, I did single-handedly develop Flow AI. You know that's true. You've never written a line of code for the project. You've never contributed to the algorithm design. You've never even understood the technical details well enough to explain them without my documentation." David's face turned an even deeper shade of red. "That's not how leadership works, Sarah. I don't need to write code to be responsible for innovation. I create the vision, I allocate resources, I make strategic decisions. That's what CEOs do. But claiming you developed the algorithm yourself, putting your name on patent applications as the primary inventor, describing technical details in interviews as if they came from your own research, that's not leadership. That's theft." The word hung in the air between us like an accusation that couldn't be taken back. David stared at me for a long moment, his expression cycling through anger, disbelief, and something that might have been fear. "You're fired," he said quietly. The security guard escorted me out of the building like I was some kind of criminal. 20 minutes after David uttered those 2 words, I found myself standing on the sidewalk outside Frost Tower, holding a cardboard box containing 3 years of my professional life. My plant from the windowsill, a few technical books, and the small framed photo of my parents that had sat on my desk since my first day. Everything else that mattered, all my code, my documentation, my research notes, remained locked away in TechFlow's systems, now claimed as David's intellectual property. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the Austin pavement as office workers hurried past me, none of them aware that they were witnessing the destruction of someone's career. I stood there for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, trying to process what had just happened. 3 years of 70-hour weeks, 3 years of believing I was building something meaningful, 3 years of sacrificing my personal life for a company that had just discarded me like yesterday's newspaper. My phone buzzed with a text from Lisa Kim. "Sarah, what happened? Security just cleaned out your desk and Marcus sent an email saying you're no longer with the company. Are you okay?" Even Lisa, sweet, naive Lisa who still believed in workplace fairness, could see the injustice in my sudden departure. But what could she do? She was a junior developer who needed her job, who couldn't afford to challenge the leadership team over someone who was already gone. I drove home in a daze, my hands shaking as I gripped the steering wheel. My apartment felt different when I walked through the door, smaller somehow, as if losing my job had diminished everything around me. The whiteboards on my walls, still covered with Flow AI algorithms and optimization equations, now seemed like monuments to my own naivety. All those late nights working at home, all those weekends spent debugging and refining the system, all those moments of breakthrough and discovery that had felt so meaningful just hours earlier. Emma called before I could even set down my box of belongings. "Sarah, I just saw the news. TechFlow announced that their lead AI engineer left to pursue other opportunities. What the hell happened?" "David fired me," I said, my voice sounding hollow even to my own ears. I told Dr. Hayes the truth about who developed Flow AI, and David couldn't handle having his lies exposed. "Jesus Christ, are you okay? Do you need me to come over?" I wanted to say yes, wanted to have my best friend there to help me process this disaster, but I also needed time alone to think. "I'm okay for now. I just need to figure out what comes next." What came next, apparently, was watching TechFlow's version of events unfold in real time across social media and tech blogs. Within hours of my departure, Jennifer Walsh had crafted a narrative that painted my exit as a voluntary decision to explore new opportunities. The company's official statement thanked me for my contributions to implementing CEO David Chen's innovative Flow AI system and wished me well in my future endeavors. But the real knife twist came the next morning when I opened my laptop to find an email from TechFlow's legal team. The subject line read, "Confidentiality and non-disclosure obligations," and the message was a not-so-subtle reminder of the various agreements I had signed when joining the company. They were particularly interested in ensuring I understood my obligations regarding proprietary technology, trade secrets, and public statements about my former employer. The email included an attachment with my original employment contract, highlighting clauses about intellectual property assignment and confidentiality. According to these documents, anything I had developed while employed at TechFlow belonged to the company, regardless of who had actually created it. My revolutionary algorithm, my months of research, my breakthrough innovations, all of it was legally David's property, simply because I had been working for his company when I developed it. I read through the contract with growing horror, realizing how thoroughly I had been outmaneuvered. David hadn't just stolen credit for my work. He had done so in a way that was completely legal and enforceable. Every late night I had spent coding at home. Every weekend I had sacrificed to solve technical challenges. Every moment of inspiration that had led to Flow AI's creation. All of it had been automatically transferred to TechFlow's ownership the moment I hit save on my keyboard. The legal implications were devastating, but the personal betrayal cut even deeper. I had trusted David, had believed in his vision for the company, had thought we were building something together. The realization that he had been planning to claim credit for my work all along, that my contributions had always been seen as exploitable resources rather than valued innovations, made me feel physically sick. Over the following days, I watched from the outside as TechFlow's momentum continued building. Dr. Robert Hayes' investment was officially announced, with glowing quotes about David's technical brilliance and innovative approach to artificial intelligence. Tech journalists who had never heard of Flow AI before David's announcement now wrote, detailed analyses of his breakthrough algorithm. Industry conferences began inviting David to speak about the future of business automation. Meanwhile, I was fielding phone calls from recruiters who had heard about my departure from TechFlow. These conversations followed a predictable pattern. The recruiters were interested in my experience with AI and machine learning, but when they asked about my role in developing Flow AI, I found myself in an impossible position. I couldn't claim credit for the work without violating my confidentiality agreements, but I also couldn't honestly describe my contributions as merely implementation support for someone else's innovation. "So you worked closely with David Chen on the Flow AI project?" one recruiter asked during a particularly frustrating phone call. "That must have been an incredible learning experience. What was it like collaborating with someone of his technical caliber?" I wanted to scream. I wanted to explain that David Chen couldn't code his way out of a paper bag, that he had never contributed a single meaningful idea to Flow AI's development, that his technical caliber was roughly equivalent to that of a first-year computer science student. But instead, I found myself giving non-committal responses about the collaborative nature of software development and the importance of team effort. The worst part was seeing how the tech community had embraced David's narrative. Austin's startup ecosystem was relatively small, and everyone was talking about TechFlow's upcoming IPO. David was being featured in local business magazines, invited to speak at entrepreneurship events, and held up as an example of the city's growing tech sophistication. Friends and former colleagues would mention seeing him in interviews or reading articles about his innovative algorithm, always with an undertone of, "Isn't it amazing what your old boss accomplished?" Emma tried to keep my spirits up during our regular coffee meetings, but even she was struggling to find silver linings in the situation. "Maybe this is for the best," she said one afternoon as we sat at our usual table at Grind Coffee. "You're incredibly talented, Sarah. Any company would be lucky to have you. Maybe working for someone else will give you the recognition you deserve." But I wasn't interested in working for someone else. The experience with David had shown me how vulnerable employees were to exploitation, how easily years of work could be claimed by whoever held the right title. I had spent my entire career believing that talent and hard work would be enough, that good engineers would naturally rise to positions where their contributions would be recognized and rewarded. Now I understood that the tech industry was fundamentally about power and control, and that technical brilliance meant nothing without the legal and financial leverage to protect it. The breaking point came 3 weeks after my firing, when I opened LinkedIn to find that David had posted a long article titled "Lessons from Building Breakthrough AI Technology." The piece was a detailed account of his journey developing Flow AI, complete with technical insights, development challenges, and personal anecdotes about late-night coding sessions and eureka moments. Every word of it was lifted from my own experiences, my own struggles, my own discoveries, but rewritten as if David had lived through them himself. The article had already received hundreds of likes and dozens of comments from industry leaders praising David's technical depth and innovative thinking. Venture capitalists were sharing it as an example of the hands-on leadership they looked for in CEO investments. Engineering managers were using it as inspiration for their own teams, holding David up as a model of the technically proficient executive. I read through the entire piece with a mixture of rage and disbelief. David described the moment when he realized that traditional optimization approaches were focusing on the wrong variables, using the exact phrase I had written in my original algorithm documentation. He talked about spending months debugging neural network architectures, when I knew for a fact that he had never even looked at the code. He mentioned the breakthrough that came during a particularly challenging weekend of intensive development work, referring to a specific Saturday, when I had worked 18 hours straight to solve a critical performance issue. But the most infuriating part was his conclusion, where he wrote about the importance of perseverance and dedication in technical innovation. Building revolutionary technology requires more than just intelligence, David had written. It demands the willingness to push through obstacles, to question assumptions, to sacrifice personal comfort for the sake of breakthrough discovery. Too many engineers give up when faced with truly difficult challenges. The difference between good engineers and great ones is the persistence to keep working until you find the solution. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. David was lecturing the tech community about engineering persistence and sacrifice while taking credit for someone else's persistence and sacrifice. He was positioning himself as a thought leader on technical innovation, while having never innovated anything himself. He was building his entire professional reputation on work that I had done, struggles that I had endured, discoveries that I had made. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling of my apartment, my mind racing with anger and frustration. The legal system couldn't help me because I had signed away my rights to anything I developed while employed. The tech community wouldn't believe me because David's narrative was already established, and I had no way to prove my claims without violating confidentiality agreements. Even my own professional network was starting to doubt my version of events, wondering why someone with my supposed talents wasn't able to find a new position quickly. But as I lay there in the darkness, a different kind of clarity began to emerge. David's success was entirely dependent on Flow AI's continued performance and market acceptance, the IPO that he was planning, the valuation that investors were excited about, the reputation he was building. All of it rested on the assumption that his algorithm would work as promised when deployed at scale, and I knew something that David didn't know. Something that only the person who had actually written the code could understand. Flow AI had a critical vulnerability. During the final weeks of development, I had discovered a race condition in the neural network's optimization routine that could cause catastrophic failures under specific load conditions. The bug was subtle and difficult to reproduce, requiring exactly the right combination of input complexity and processing volume to trigger. In a typical enterprise deployment, with maybe a few hundred users and moderate data volumes, the system would work perfectly. But under the kind of massive scale that a post-IPO TechFlow would be targeting, with thousands of users and enormous data processing requirements, the race condition would eventually surface. I had been planning to fix the bug during the next development cycle, but my firing had interrupted that process. The current version of Flow AI that would be demonstrated to investors and deployed to early customers was fundamentally unstable at scale. It was like a bridge that looked solid but would collapse the moment too many cars tried to cross it at once. David and his team had no idea this vulnerability existed. The bug was buried deep in the optimization algorithms, in code that only I fully understood. Marcus Thompson might have been able to find it eventually, but that would require him to actually examine the technical implementation rather than just managing development timelines and resource allocation. Given his track record of technical involvement, I estimated it would take him months to discover the issue, if he ever found it at all. This realization changed everything. David wasn't just stealing credit for my work. He was about to take a fundamentally flawed system public and defraud investors who believed they were buying into revolutionary technology. The IPO would raise hundreds of millions of dollars based on demonstrations of Flow AI's capabilities, but those demonstrations would be carefully controlled to avoid triggering the race condition. Once the system was deployed at scale, once customers began pushing it to its limits, the failures would be inevitable and catastrophic. I could fix the bug easily. A few lines of code, maybe an hour of work, and Flow AI would be as stable and revolutionary as David was claiming. But why should I? Why should I help the man who had stolen my work achieve even greater success? Why should I contribute to his fraud by ensuring that his lies became sustainable reality? The next morning, I called Emma and asked her to meet me for breakfast at a small diner near my apartment. I needed to talk through my discovery with someone I trusted, someone who would understand both the technical implications and the ethical dimensions of what I was considering. So let me make sure I understand this, Emma said after I explained the situation. David is about to take your algorithm public, claiming he developed it himself. but the system has a critical flaw that will cause it to fail under the exact conditions that would be required for a successful public company? Exactly. And the flaw is in code that only I understand well enough to fix quickly. David's team could eventually find and patch it, but not before it causes serious problems for customers and investors. Emma leaned back in her chair, processing the implications. Sarah, this is huge. If Flow AI fails after the IPO, if it can't handle enterprise-scale deployments, TechFlow's valuation will collapse. David's reputation will be destroyed, Dr. Hayes. We'll lose his investment. Everyone who bought shares will be wiped out. I know. And you're the only person who can prevent that from happening. I know. Emma studied my face carefully. What are you thinking of doing? I had been asking myself the same question since discovering the vulnerability. The ethical engineer in me wanted to warn someone about the bug, to prevent the inevitable disaster that would hurt innocent investors and customers. But the woman who had been betrayed and discarded wanted to watch David's house of lies come crashing down around him. I'm thinking of doing nothing, I said finally. I'm thinking of letting David discover the hard way what happens when you build a company on someone else's work without understanding what you've stolen. Emma was quiet for a long moment. That's not really doing nothing, though. That's actively choosing to let a disaster happen when you could prevent it. Is it my responsibility to fix problems for a company that fired me? Am I obligated to help David succeed after he stole credit for my work? No, but what about Dr. Hayes? What about the other investors who are putting their money into this based on David's claims? What about the customers who will be hurt when the system fails? Those were the questions that had been keeping me awake at night. My anger at David was justified, but the consequences of Flow AI's failure would extend far beyond just him. Dr. Hayes seemed like a decent man who had made his investment decision based on careful technical analysis. TechFlow's employees, including Lisa Kim, would lose their jobs if the company collapsed. Customers who adopted Flow AI would face serious disruptions to their business operations when the system failed. But then I remembered David's LinkedIn article, his shameless appropriation of my experiences and insights. I thought about the patent applications that listed him as the primary inventor, the investor presentations where he described technical details that he had never understood, the interviews where he positioned himself as a thought leader in artificial intelligence. David wasn't just stealing credit for past work. He was using that stolen credit to build an entire career and reputation that would last for decades. If I fixed the bug quietly, if I somehow ensured that Flow AI worked as promised, I would be enabling David's fraud to succeed permanently. He would become wealthy and famous based on my innovation, while I would remain in the shadows, legally prohibited from claiming credit for my own work. The injustice would be complete and irreversible. What would you do? I asked Emma. She sighed, clearly struggling with the same ethical dilemma that was tearing me apart. Honestly, I don't know. Part of me wants to see David get what he deserves, but part of me thinks that letting innocent people get hurt isn't the right way to achieve justice. We finished breakfast without reaching any conclusions, but the conversation had helped clarify my thinking. Whatever I decided to do, it needed to be strategic rather than emotional. If I was going to act against David, I needed to do it in a way that maximized the consequences for him while minimizing the harm to innocent parties. That afternoon, I began researching TechFlow's IPO timeline and process. According to public filings and industry publications, the company was planning to go public within the next 6 months. The process would involve several stages. Initial investor roadshows where David would present Flow AI's capabilities, due diligence reviews by potential institutional investors, regulatory filings with detailed technical and financial information, and finally the actual public offering where shares would be sold to individual and institutional buyers. Each stage represented an opportunity for the race condition to be discovered and addressed. If Flow AI failed during early demonstrations, The problems could be fixed before any real money changed hands. If the vulnerability was found during due diligence, investors could adjust their valuations or withdraw from the offering entirely. But if the system made it through the entire IPO process without the bug being discovered, the eventual failure would be catastrophic for everyone involved. I also researched Dr. Robert Hayes' background and investment philosophy. The more I learned about him, the more conflicted I felt about my plan. Hayes had built his reputation on supporting genuinely innovative technologies and helping entrepreneurs bring breakthrough products to market. His portfolio included several companies that had gone on to make significant positive impacts in their industries. He wasn't a predatory investor looking to flip companies for quick profits. He was someone who genuinely believed in the potential of technology to solve important problems. Hayes had also been vocal about the importance of technical integrity in startup investments. In several interviews and conference presentations, he had criticized the tendency of some entrepreneurs to oversell their capabilities or misrepresent their technical achievements. He had specifically mentioned the need for thorough technical due diligence to prevent investors from being misled by charismatic CEOs who didn't understand their own products. This information gave me an idea for a different approach. Instead of simply allowing Flow AI to fail catastrophically, perhaps I could find a way to expose David's deception before the IPO completed. If Dr. Hayes learned the truth about who had actually developed the algorithm, and if he understood the technical vulnerability that David's team was unaware of, he might withdraw his support for the offering. That would achieve justice for David's theft while protecting innocent investors from fraud. But executing such a plan would require careful timing and ironclad evidence. I would need to document not only my role in developing Flow AI, but also the existence of the race condition and David's team's ignorance of it. I would need to present this information in a way that couldn't be dismissed as the complaints of a disgruntled former employee. And I would need to do it without violating the confidentiality agreements that could land me in legal trouble. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that my situation was similar to that of a whistleblower trying to expose corporate fraud. Like whistleblowers in other industries, I had inside knowledge of wrongdoing that could harm innocent parties, if left unchecked. The challenge was finding a way to reveal that information without destroying my own legal and financial security in the process. I spent the next week researching whistleblower protections and legal precedents for intellectual property disputes in the tech industry. What I found was not encouraging. While some laws existed to protect employees who reported safety violations or financial fraud, there were very few protections for engineers who wanted to challenge false claims about technical achievements. The legal system seemed designed to favor employers and executives over individual contributors, especially when those contributors had signed comprehensive confidentiality agreements. However, I did discover one potentially relevant precedent. Several years earlier, a software engineer at a major tech company had successfully challenged his former employer's patent applications by demonstrating that he had developed the claimed innovations before joining the company. The key to his success had been maintaining independent documentation of his work, including time-stamped files and communications that predated his employment. This gave me hope, because I had been working on machine learning and optimization algorithms long before joining TechFlow. My graduate research at MIT had focused on neural network efficiency, and I had published several academic papers on related topics. While Flow AI itself had been developed during my employment at TechFlow, many of the underlying concepts and approaches had originated from my earlier independent research. I began gathering all of my pre-TechFlow documentation, research papers, conference presentations, GitHub repositories, email communications with academic collaborators, even photos of whiteboards from my graduate lab sessions. Slowly, I assembled a timeline that showed the evolution of my thinking about neural network optimization, from my early academic work through my breakthrough at TechFlow. The picture that emerged was compelling. Flow AI wasn't just something I had created while employed by David's company. It was the culmination of years of independent research that I had brought to TechFlow as part of my expertise. The core insights that made Flow AI revolutionary could be traced back to work I had done as a graduate student, long before I had ever heard of David Chen or TechFlow Solutions. This realization changed my legal position significantly. While TechFlow might own the specific implementation of Flow AI that I had created while employed there, they couldn't claim ownership of the fundamental research and insights that had made that implementation possible. Those belonged to me, and I had every right to discuss them publicly or use them to challenge false claims about their origins. Armed with this new understanding, I began preparing a comprehensive document that told the real story of Flow AI's development. The document included my academic research history, the evolution of my thinking about neural network optimization, the specific breakthrough moments that had led to Flow AI's architecture, and detailed technical analysis of the algorithms, strengths and vulnerabilities. But I still needed a way to get this information to Dr. Hayes without alerting David to my intentions. A direct approach seemed too risky, both legally and strategically. If I contacted Hayes directly, David would likely learn about it quickly and take steps to discredit my claims or prevent further communication. The solution came from an unexpected source. While researching Hayes' background, I discovered that he would be speaking at the Austin Tech Summit, a major industry conference scheduled for the following month. The conference would bring together entrepreneurs, investors, and technologists from across the region, providing an opportunity for informal networking and knowledge sharing. More importantly, the conference would include several panel discussions about artificial intelligence and machine learning, topics that were directly relevant to my expertise and experience. If I could secure a speaking slot or panelist position, I would have a legitimate platform to discuss my research and insights about neural network optimization. Such a presentation wouldn't violate my confidentiality agreements because it would focus on general technical principles rather than TechFlow-specific implementations. However, getting selected as a conference speaker would require demonstrating my expertise and credibility in the AI field. This meant updating my professional profile, reaching out to industry contacts, and positioning myself as a thought leader, worthy of a conference platform. It would be a significant undertaking, but it offered the best chance of reaching Dr. Hayes and other potential allies without triggering legal retaliation from David. I started by updating my LinkedIn profile to better reflect my background and expertise in artificial intelligence. I highlighted my academic publications, my graduate research experience, and my general work in neural network optimization, without specifically mentioning TechFlow or Flow AI. I also began writing technical blog posts about machine learning concepts, sharing insights from my years of research in accessible language that demonstrated both my knowledge and my ability to communicate complex ideas effectively. The response was immediate and encouraging. Within days of updating my profile, I began receiving connection requests from AI researchers, startup founders, and venture capitalists who had found my content interesting. Several people reached out to discuss potential collaboration opportunities or to ask questions about my research approach. Most importantly, I caught the attention of the Austin Tech Summit's organizing committee. The conference's technical program chair sent me an email expressing interest in my background and asking if I would be willing to participate in a panel discussion about the future of business automation. The panel would focus on emerging trends in AI and machine learning, exactly the kind of forum where I could discuss my work without violating any legal restrictions. I accepted the invitation immediately, knowing that this was my opportunity to set the record straight about Flow AI's origins and David's deception. The panel was scheduled for the second day of the conference, with Dr. Robert Hayes listed as a confirmed attendee in the audience. Everything was falling into place for a confrontation that would expose the truth about TechFlow's fraudulent claims. But as the conference date approached, I began to feel the weight of what I was planning to do. Challenging David publicly would essentially declare war on one of Austin's most prominent startup CEOs. If my plan failed, if I couldn't prove my claims, or if the tech community sided with David, my career in Austin would be over. I would be branded as a troublemaker, someone who couldn't be trusted to maintain confidentiality or work collaboratively with leadership teams. On the other hand, if I succeeded in exposing David's theft, if I could demonstrate that TechFlow's IPO was based on fraudulent claims about technical innovation, the consequences would extend far beyond just my personal vindication. The Austin tech community prided itself on integrity and innovation, and the revelation that one of its most celebrated companies was built on stolen work would send shockwaves through the entire ecosystem. The night before the conference, I sat in my apartment reviewing my presentation materials one final time. The panel discussion would last 45 minutes, with each panelist given time to present their perspective on AI trends before engaging in a moderated discussion with audience questions. My presentation would focus on the technical challenges of scaling neural networks for enterprise applications, using general examples that clearly paralleled Flow AI's architecture without directly referencing TechFlow's proprietary implementation. But buried within my technical discussion would be specific details that only the true developer of Flow AI could know. I would mention the exact optimization approaches that made the algorithm revolutionary, describe the precise mathematical insights that enabled its efficiency improvements, and discuss the potential vulnerabilities that could affect systems built on similar architectures. Anyone with deep knowledge of Flow AI's implementation would immediately recognize that I was describing their system with intimate familiarity. More crucially, I would present this information in a way that highlighted David's fundamental misunderstanding of the technology he was claiming to have developed. By discussing the advanced mathematical concepts and algorithmic design principles that Flow AI relied upon, I would make it clear that the system's creator possessed a level of technical sophistication that David had never demonstrated publicly. The plan was risky but elegant. I would never explicitly claim to have developed Flow AI, never directly accuse David of theft, never violate my confidentiality agreements by discussing TechFlow's proprietary information. Instead, I would simply demonstrate my deep expertise in exactly the areas where David's knowledge was superficial, allowing astute observers like Dr. Hayes to draw their own conclusions about who possessed the technical credibility to have created such a breakthrough. As I finally drifted off to sleep that night, I felt a mixture of nervous anticipation and grim satisfaction. Tomorrow would either mark the beginning of my vindication or the end of my career in Austin's tech scene. But either way, I would finally have the opportunity to show the world what real technical innovation looked like, and to challenge the narrative that had allowed David Chen to profit from my work while I remained invisible. The Austin Convention Center buzzed with the familiar energy of a major tech conference. Entrepreneurs in designer jeans mingled with venture capitalists in expensive casual wear, while software engineers clutched oversized coffee cups and tried to look important. I arrived early, wanting to get a feel for the crowd and identify key attendees before my panel discussion began. The conference program listed over 300 participants, including some of the most influential figures in Austin's startup ecosystem. As I walked through the main exhibition hall, I spotted several faces I recognized from industry publications and LinkedIn profiles. Sarah Brennan from Vertex Ventures was deep in conversation with a group of startup founders near the coffee station. Mike Chang from the Austin Technology Council was holding court by the registration desk, surrounded by entrepreneurs hoping to make connections. And there, near the main stage where keynote presentations would take place, stood Dr. Robert Hayes himself, easily recognizable from the photos I had studied online. Hayes looked exactly as I had expected, distinguished, thoughtful, and slightly apart from the more frenetic energy that characterized most conference attendees. He was listening intently to a presentation by someone I didn't recognize, occasionally asking questions that seemed to cut straight to the heart of whatever technical issue was being discussed. This was clearly someone who valued substance over style, who had built his reputation on being able to distinguish genuine innovation from marketing hype. I forced myself to look away and continue circulating through the crowd. My panel wasn't scheduled until that afternoon, and I needed to remain inconspicuous until then. Drawing attention to myself too early could alert David to my presence, assuming he had people at the conference who might recognize me. The last thing I wanted was for TechFlow's leadership team to learn about my participation before I had a chance to present my evidence. The morning keynote was delivered by Patricia Williams, the founder of a successful AI startup that had been acquired by Google 3 years earlier. Her presentation focused on the importance of technical authenticity in an industry that often prioritized marketing over substance. Too many companies today are built on buzzwords rather than breakthrough technology, Williams said, her words carrying extra weight given her track record of genuine innovation. Investors and customers deserve better than polished presentations that hide fundamental technical weaknesses. Her comments felt almost prophetic given what I was planning to reveal that afternoon. Williams was describing exactly the kind of fraudulent behavior that David had engaged in, claiming revolutionary technical capabilities while lacking the expertise to deliver on those promises. The only difference was that David had stolen someone else's work to make his claims seem credible, rather than simply exaggerating his own limited capabilities. During the coffee break that followed Williams' keynote, I overheard several conversations about TechFlow and their upcoming IPO. The company had clearly generated significant buzz within Austin's tech community, with multiple attendees expressing excitement about the potential investment opportunity. Several people mentioned David's impressive technical background and his hands-on approach to product development, repeating the narrative that Jennifer Walsh's marketing team had so effectively propagated. I've heard David Chen is one of the most technically sophisticated CEOs in Austin, one venture capitalist told his colleague while standing near my table. Having a founder who can actually write code and understand the underlying algorithms makes such a difference when evaluating AI companies. Absolutely, his colleague replied. Too many AI startups are run by business people who have no idea how their own technology works. Chen's engineering background gives TechFlow a huge advantage. Listening to these conversations made my stomach turn with a mixture of anger and determination. David had successfully convinced the entire Austin tech ecosystem that he possessed technical expertise he had never demonstrated, credibility he had never earned, and innovative capabilities he had stolen from someone else. The depth of his deception was breathtaking, and its effectiveness was a testament to how easily the tech industry could be fooled by confident presentations and compelling narratives. But it also reinforced my conviction that exposing his fraud was necessary, not just for my own vindication, but for the integrity of Austin's startup community. If David could successfully claim credit for revolutionary technology he hadn't developed, if he could build a company worth hundreds of millions of dollars on stolen work, then what did that say about the due diligence processes and evaluation criteria that investors were using? How many other companies were built on similar deceptions that simply hadn't been discovered yet? As the morning sessions continued, I attended several technical presentations that were directly relevant to my area of expertise. The quality varied significantly, with some speakers demonstrating genuine insight into machine learning challenges, while others seemed to be repeating concepts they had learned from online tutorials. This contrast made me even more confident about my upcoming presentation, knowing that I could discuss neural network optimization with a level of depth and sophistication that would clearly distinguish me from less experienced practitioners. One presentation in particular caught my attention. Dr. James Morrison from the University of Texas Computer Science Department was discussing recent advances in neural network efficiency, covering topics that were closely related to my own research. Morrison was clearly a serious academic researcher with deep expertise in the field, exactly the kind of person who would immediately recognize the significance of the insights I planned to share that afternoon. Even better, I noticed that Dr. Hayes was paying close attention to Morrison's presentation, taking detailed notes and asking follow-up questions that demonstrated his own understanding of the technical concepts being discussed. This suggested that Hayes would be prepared to appreciate the technical sophistication of my own presentation, rather than dismissing it as academic jargon that wasn't relevant to practical business applications. The lunch break provided another opportunity to observe the conference dynamics and identify potential allies for my cause. I positioned myself strategically in the networking area, close enough to overhear conversations, but far enough away to avoid drawing attention. Several discussions focused on the challenges of evaluating technical claims made by startup founders, with experienced investors sharing stories about companies that had overstated their capabilities or misrepresented their technological advantages. The problem is that most venture capitalists don't have the technical background to really understand what they're investing in, explained Sandra Kim, a partner at Oak Hill Ventures. We rely on external technical advisors and due diligence processes, but those can be gamed by sophisticated founders who know how to present their technology in the most favorable light. That's why I prefer to invest in companies where the founder actually wrote the core technology themselves, replied David Martinez from Austin Ventures. There's something different about talking to someone who can explain not just what their system does, but why they made specific architectural decisions and what trade-offs they considered during development. These comments gave me additional confidence that my approach would resonate with the investor community. By demonstrating intimate knowledge of Flow AI's technical architecture and design principles, I would be able to establish my credibility as someone who had been deeply involved in its development. The contrast with David's superficial understanding would become obvious to anyone with the expertise to evaluate our respective technical contributions. As the afternoon session began, I felt my nervous energy building toward the moment of truth. My panel was scheduled for 2:30, with Dr. Hayes confirmed as an attendee along with several other prominent investors and technology leaders. The panel would be moderated by Michael Thompson, the technology editor for Austin Business Journal, someone who had covered the local startup scene for over a decade and presumably had experience distinguishing between substance and hype. The panel setup was ideal for my purposes. Rather than being trapped in a formal presentation format, I would have the opportunity to engage in discussion with other experts and respond to questions from the audience. This would allow me to demonstrate my knowledge organically, responding to specific technical points and building credibility through detailed explanations rather than simply delivering prepared remarks. My fellow panelists were an impressive group. Dr. Morrison from UT, whom I had heard speak that morning, Jennifer Liu, the CTO of a successful Austin AI startup called TechFlow Solutions, and Roberto Santos, a machine learning consultant who worked with Fortune 500 companies on automation projects. Each of them had legitimate expertise in artificial intelligence and neural networks, creating a context where technical sophistication would be valued and recognized. As we took our seats on the panel stage, I noticed Dr. Hayes settling into a front row seat with a notebook and pen ready. Several other venture capitalists and technology executives filled the surrounding rows, creating exactly the audience I needed to reach with my message. The room held perhaps 150 people, large enough to generate significant impact if my revelations resonated with the audience. Michael Thompson began the panel with broad questions about the current state of artificial intelligence in business applications. Each panelist offered their perspective on market trends, technical challenges, and investment opportunities. I waited patiently for my turn, using the time to observe the audience's reactions and gauge their level of technical sophistication. When Thompson turned to me with a question about neural network scalability challenges, I saw my opening. 1. Of the most significant challenges in deploying neural networks for enterprise applications is managing computational complexity as data volumes increase, I began, immediately establishing the technical context for what would follow. Most optimization approaches focus on reducing training time, but the real breakthrough comes from fundamentally rethinking how networks process information during inference. I could see Dr. Hayes leaning forward with interest as I continued. The key insight that enables truly scalable neural networks is recognizing that traditional batch processing creates unnecessary computational overhead. By implementing dynamic optimization algorithms that adapt to input characteristics in real time, you can achieve performance improvements of 80% or more while maintaining accuracy levels above 99%. These numbers were no accident. They precisely matched the performance characteristics that David had been touting for Flow AI in his investor presentations and media interviews. Anyone familiar with TechFlow's technology claims would immediately recognize that I was describing their system with remarkable specificity and accuracy. "That's fascinating," said Dr. Morrison from his position next to me on the panel. "The mathematical complexity of implementing such dynamic optimization must be enormous. Can you elaborate on the algorithmic approaches that make this possible?" This was exactly the kind of follow-up question I had been hoping for. The breakthrough comes from applying variational calculus to neural network optimization in a way that treats each processing layer as an independent optimization domain, I explained, diving into technical details that I knew David could never articulate. By decomposing the optimization problem into parallel subproblems that can be solved using modified gradient descent algorithms, you avoid the computational bottlenecks that limit traditional approaches. I could see several audience members taking notes as I spoke, clearly recognizing the significance of the technical insights I was sharing. More importantly, I noticed Dr. Hayes writing rapidly in his notebook, occasionally looking up with an expression that suggested he was connecting my presentation to information he had encountered elsewhere. Jennifer Liu asked the next logical question. Implementation of such sophisticated algorithms must require extensive expertise in both theoretical, mathematics, and practical software engineering. How do you balance mathematical elegance with real-world performance requirements? That's the eternal challenge in applied machine learning, I replied, warming to the topic that had consumed years of my professional life. The theoretical foundations have to be rock solid, but you also need intimate understanding of hardware constraints, memory management, and parallel processing architectures. In my experience, the most significant breakthroughs come from researchers who can work comfortably at both the mathematical and implementation levels. This comment was designed to highlight exactly the kind of dual expertise that David lacked. While he could deliver polished presentations about AI concepts, he had never demonstrated the ability to work at the mathematical level required for genuine algorithmic innovation, nor did he possess the software engineering skills needed to implement complex optimization algorithms efficiently. Roberto Santos picked up the thread. "You're describing capabilities that are quite rare in the industry. Most AI companies have either strong theoretical researchers or skilled engineers, but rarely both in the same person. When you encounter someone who claims to have developed breakthrough algorithms single-handedly, how do you evaluate the credibility of those claims?" The question was perfect, allowing me to address the core issue of technical credibility without directly accusing anyone of deception. Due diligence in AI investments requires going beyond surface-level presentations, said, making sure to speak clearly so that Dr. Hayes could hear every word. Genuine algorithmic innovation leaves specific technical fingerprints that can be verified through detailed questioning. Someone who has actually developed breakthrough optimization algorithms should be able to explain not just what their system does, but why specific mathematical approaches were chosen, what alternative methods were considered and rejected, and how particular implementation challenges were overcome. I paused to let that sink in before continuing. In my experience, the depth of technical knowledge required to create truly revolutionary neural network architectures is quite specialized. It typically takes years of focused research in optimization theory, combined with extensive hands-on coding experience, to develop the intuition needed for genuine breakthroughs. Dr. Hayes was now writing furiously, clearly recognizing the implications of what I was saying. Several other audience members seemed to be having similar realizations, based on their body language and the meaningful glances being exchanged throughout the room. Michael Thompson moved the discussion towards specific applications of AI technology in business contexts. Sarah, you've described some sophisticated optimization techniques. Can you give us a concrete example of how these approaches might be applied to solve real-world business problems? This was my moment to demonstrate knowledge that could only come from having actually developed Flow AI. Consider the challenge of automating complex business workflows that involve multiple decision points and variable processing requirements. I began, describing exactly the problem that Flow AI was designed to solve. Traditional automation systems require extensive manual configuration for each workflow type, but neural networks can learn to optimize processing paths automatically. I continued with increasingly specific technical details. The key innovation is implementing recursive optimization algorithms that can analyze workflow complexity in real time and dynamically allocate computational resources based on predicted processing requirements. This requires solving what's essentially a multidimensional optimization problem while maintaining linear computational complexity. Several audience members were now clearly connecting my presentation to information they had encountered elsewhere. I could see recognition dawning on multiple faces as people realized that I was describing technology that sounded remarkably similar to systems they had heard about from other sources. The implementation challenges for such a system are considerable, I continued. You need to solve race condition problems in the optimization routine, manage memory allocation for variable-size data structures, and ensure numerical stability when processing optimization matrices with extreme eigenvalue ratios. These are the kinds of technical hurdles that separate theoretical possibilities from practical implementations. That last comment about race conditions was my most direct hint about Flow AI's critical vulnerability. Anyone with detailed knowledge of the system's architecture would immediately understand that I was describing a specific technical challenge that affected their codebase. More importantly, I was implying that solving these challenges required the kind of deep technical expertise that couldn't be faked or borrowed from someone else's work. Dr. Morrison looked intrigued. You mentioned race conditions in optimization. Routines. That's a particularly subtle category of software defect that can be very difficult to detect during normal testing. How do you approach validation and quality assurance for such complex algorithms? Race conditions in neural network optimization are especially tricky because they typically only manifest under specific load conditions that might not occur during development or limited testing, I explained, speaking directly to the heart of Flow AI's vulnerability. You might have a system that works perfectly with moderate data volumes and user loads, but fails catastrophically when deployed at enterprise scale. The mathematical complexity makes these issues extremely difficult to debug without intimate knowledge of the underlying algorithmic implementation. The room had grown noticeably quiet as the audience absorbed the implications of what I was describing. Several people were now looking at their phones, presumably researching companies and technologies that matched the systems I was discussing. Dr. Hayes had stopped taking notes and was staring at me with an expression of intense concentration, clearly working through the connections between my presentation and information he had encountered in other contexts. Jennifer Liu asked the question that I knew was coming. Sarah, the specificity of your technical knowledge is quite impressive. This sounds like more than just theoretical research. Have you been involved in developing systems that implement these approaches commercially? This was the moment I had been preparing for, the opportunity to establish my credibility without violating confidentiality agreements. My background includes both academic research and practical implementation experience, I said carefully. I've had the opportunity to work on neural network optimization problems in various contexts, both in academic settings and in commercial environments. The insights I'm sharing today come from years of hands-on experience with the mathematical and engineering challenges involved in creating genuinely scalable AI systems. Roberto Santos pressed for more details. Can you tell us about specific companies or projects where you've applied these techniques? I prefer to focus on the Technical principles rather than specific commercial applications, I replied, maintaining the careful balance I had practiced. What's important is that these optimization approaches represent genuine breakthroughs in neural network efficiency, with performance characteristics that significantly exceed what's possible using traditional methods. The mathematical foundations are solid, the implementation challenges are well understood, and the potential applications are enormous. This response was designed to demonstrate my deep involvement in developing such systems while avoiding direct claims that could trigger legal retaliation. Anyone with expertise in the field would recognize that my level of technical knowledge could only come from hands-on development experience. But I wasn't making explicit statements that could be challenged in court. Michael Thompson seemed to sense the undercurrents in the room. There seems to be a lot of interest in the specific techniques you're describing. Without naming companies, can you help us understand what investors should look for when evaluating AI startups that claim to have developed breakthrough optimization algorithms? Investors should insist on detailed technical presentations that go beyond high-level architecture diagrams, I said, speaking directly to Dr. Hayes and the other venture capitalists in the audience. Ask about specific mathematical approaches, implementation trade-offs, and performance validation methodologies. Most importantly, make sure the technical presentations are delivered by the people who actually developed the algorithms, not just the executives who are claiming credit for them. That last comment was as close as I could come to directly challenging David's credibility without making explicit accusations. The implication was clear. Investors should be skeptical of CEOs who claim to have developed sophisticated algorithms but couldn't discuss the technical details with authority and depth. The panel discussion was now entering its final phase, with Michael Thompson opening the floor for audience questions. I could see several hands raised, including someone in the third row who looked familiar. As my eyes adjusted to the auditorium lighting, I realized with a shock that it was Lisa Kim, my former colleague from TechFlow. Lisa's presence at the conference was unexpected and potentially problematic. While she had always been supportive of my work, she was still employed by TechFlow and presumably loyal to the company. If she recognized the connection between my presentation and Flow AI's architecture, she might feel obligated to report back to David and his leadership team. But when Thompson called on Lisa for her question, her words surprised me. This is a question for Sarah. You've described optimization approaches that sound remarkably sophisticated and well-developed. I'm curious about the timeline for developing such algorithms. How long would it typically take a skilled researcher to go from initial concept to working implementation? The question seemed innocent enough on the surface, but I detected something more in Lisa's tone and expression. She was giving me an opportunity to establish the time frame for my work, potentially supporting claims about my role in developing Flow AI if the issue ever came to legal proceedings. Complex neural network optimization algorithms typically require 18 to 24 months of intensive development, I replied, making sure to speak clearly for the recording devices that were capturing the panel. That includes time for theoretical research, mathematical modeling, initial implementation, debugging, optimization, and validation testing. The most challenging breakthrough algorithms often require multiple failed approaches before finding solutions that work reliably. Lisa nodded as if my answer confirmed something she already knew. And during that development process, how important is it for the researcher to maintain detailed documentation of their approach, their mathematical insights, and their implementation decisions? Documentation is absolutely critical, I said, recognizing that Lisa was helping me establish the importance of the evidence I had been gathering. Breakthrough algorithmic research generates insights that need to be captured in real time, before they're forgotten or misremembered. Anyone who has genuinely developed revolutionary optimization algorithms should have extensive documentation showing the evolution of their thinking, their mathematical proofs, their implementation experiments, and their validation results. The exchange with Lisa had accomplished exactly what I needed. It established the importance of documentation in proving authorship of algorithmic innovations, while suggesting that genuine developers would have extensive records supporting their claims. Anyone listening would understand that technical credibility could be verified through detailed examination of research records and development artifacts. Dr. Hayes raised his hand for the final question of the session. Sarah, you've presented a compelling case for the importance of technical authenticity in AI investments. If you were advising investors who were considering significant commitments to companies claiming breakthrough AI capabilities, what specific red flags would you tell them to watch for? This was the question I had been hoping for, the opportunity to provide guidance that would directly apply to TechFlow's situation. The biggest red flag is when technical presentations lack depth and specificity, I said, looking directly at Dr. Hayes as I spoke. Revolutionary algorithms have specific mathematical properties that their developers should be able to explain in detail. If someone claims to have created breakthrough optimization techniques but can't discuss the underlying mathematical approaches, that's cause for concern. I paused to ensure my words were being recorded clearly. Another red flag is inconsistency between claimed technical achievements and demonstrated expertise. If someone claims to have solved complex optimization problems but has never published research in the field, never presented at technical conferences, and can't engage in detailed discussions about algorithmic trade-offs, investors should question whether they actually developed the technology they're claiming credit for. The final red flag I mentioned was the most specific. Finally, investors should be particularly careful about companies where the claimed technical innovations come from individuals who don't have documented track records in the relevant fields. Revolutionary AI algorithms don't emerge from nowhere. They build on years of research, mathematical training, and hands-on implementation experience. If the technical timeline doesn't make sense, if the claimed innovations seem disconnected from the developer's background and expertise, that's a strong indication that something isn't right. As the panel concluded and the audience began dispersing, I noticed Dr. Hayes approaching the stage with his notebook still in hand. Several other attendees were also moving in my direction, clearly interested in continuing the conversation about technical credibility and investment due diligence. Sarah, that was an incredibly insightful presentation, Dr. Hayes said as he reached the edge of the stage. I'd love to discuss some of these concepts in more detail. Would you have time for a brief conversation this afternoon? This was exactly the outcome I had been working toward, but now that the moment had arrived, I felt a mixture of excitement and terror. My plan had worked. I had established my technical credibility, demonstrated intimate knowledge of Flow AI's architecture, and caught the attention of TechFlow's primary investor. But the next phase would require even more careful navigation, as I would need to share specific information about David's deception without violating legal constraints or appearing vindictive. I'd be happy to continue our discussion, I replied, climbing down from the panel stage. Perhaps we could find a quiet spot where we can talk more privately. As Dr. Hayes led me toward a less crowded section of the convention center, I noticed Lisa Kim hovering nearby, clearly wanting to speak with me, but unsure whether to approach. I caught her eye and nodded slightly, hoping to convey my appreciation for her supportive questions during the panel without encouraging her to join our conversation. The next hour would determine whether my carefully planned exposure of David's fraud would succeed, or whether I would find myself facing legal retaliation from one of Austin's most powerful startup CEOs. But as I walked alongside one of Silicon Valley's most respected investors, armed with irrefutable evidence of my role in developing revolutionary AI technology, I felt more confident than I had in months. The truth was finally going to come out, and David Chen was about to discover that stealing credit for someone else's breakthrough innovation came with consequences he had never anticipated. Dr. Hayes guided me to a quiet corner of the convention center where leather chairs were arranged around a small coffee table, far enough from the main exhibition area to ensure privacy. He settled into his chair with the deliberate movements of someone accustomed to conducting important conversations, placing his notebook on the table between us and maintaining the kind of direct eye contact that suggested he was prepared to discuss serious matters. "Sarah, I have to tell you that your presentation this afternoon was extraordinary," he began, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had heard countless technical pitches over the years. "The depth of your knowledge about neural network optimization is remarkable, and your insights about scalability challenges align perfectly with some of the technical issues I've been grappling with in my current investments." I felt my pulse quicken as he continued. "In particular, your discussion of dynamic optimization algorithms and race condition vulnerabilities was fascinating. Those are extremely sophisticated concepts that I rarely hear discussed with such authority, even by experienced AI researchers." The opening was perfect, allowing me to demonstrate my expertise while gradually introducing the information he needed to understand TechFlow's situation. "Thank you, Dr. Hayes. These optimization challenges have been a focus of my research for several years now. The mathematical complexity is significant, but the potential applications make it worthwhile to push through the difficult problems." "Indeed. I'm particularly interested in your comments about race conditions and optimization routines. You mentioned that these issues typically only manifest under enterprise-scale deployment conditions. That suggests you've had direct experience with systems that have encountered such problems." His observation was astute, confirming my assessment that Dr. Hayes possessed the technical sophistication to understand the implications of what I was sharing. "Yes. I have encountered situations where optimization algorithms that worked perfectly during development and testing encountered serious stability issues when deployed at scale. It's one of the most challenging aspects of developing production-ready AI systems." Dr. Hayes leaned forward slightly, his expression indicating that our conversation had moved beyond casual networking into more substantive territory. "Sarah, I hope you won't mind a direct question, but your knowledge of these specific technical challenges seems remarkably detailed. Have you been involved in developing commercial AI systems that have encountered these kinds of issues?" This was the moment I had been preparing for, the opportunity to begin sharing specific information about Flow AI without immediately revealing the connection to TechFlow. "Dr. Hayes, I have been directly involved in developing neural network optimization algorithms that exhibit exactly the characteristics I described in my presentation. The system I worked on achieved performance improvements of 85%, while maintaining accuracy above 99%, using dynamic optimization approaches that adapt to input characteristics in real time." I could see recognition flickering in his eyes as he processed the specific performance metrics I had mentioned. Those numbers were identical to the claims that David had been making about Flow AI's capabilities in his investor presentations. "Those are impressive performance characteristics," Dr. Hayes said carefully. "Systems with such capabilities would be extremely valuable in the current market." "Absolutely. The commercial applications are enormous, particularly for business process automation where traditional approaches require extensive manual configuration. A system that can learn to optimize workflows automatically, adapting to varying complexity requirements while maintaining linear computational scaling, represents a genuine breakthrough in enterprise AI." Dr. Hayes was now taking notes again, clearly connecting my technical description to information he had encountered elsewhere. "Sarah, the system you're describing sounds remarkably sophisticated. Development of such technology would require significant time investment and specialized expertise. How long would you estimate it takes to develop algorithms with these capabilities?" "In my experience, developing the core optimization algorithms required approximately 18 months of intensive research and implementation work. That included theoretical development, mathematical modeling, coding, debugging, and extensive validation testing. The breakthrough insights don't come quickly. They require sustained focus and deep expertise in both optimization theory and practical software." "Engineering. 18 months," Dr. Hayes repeated, making a note in his book. And this work would require someone with extensive background in both theoretical mathematics and hands-on implementation experience. Absolutely. The mathematical foundations are quite complex, involving variational calculus, parallel optimization algorithms, and numerical stability analysis. But you also need intimate understanding of software architecture, memory management, and parallel processing to create a system that actually works in production environments. I could see Dr. Hayes working through the implications of what I was telling him. The technical timeline I was describing, combined with the specific expertise requirements, created a profile that could be verified against public records and professional backgrounds. Sarah, I hope you'll forgive another direct question, but I'm curious about the documentation and intellectual property aspects of developing such sophisticated algorithms. Someone who created breakthrough optimization technology would presumably have extensive technical documentation supporting their work. This was exactly the opening I needed to introduce the evidence I had been gathering. You're absolutely right, Dr. Hayes. Developing revolutionary AI algorithms generates enormous amounts of documentation, research notes, mathematical proofs, implementation experiments, performance benchmarks, architectural decisions. Anyone who has genuinely created such technology should be able to provide detailed records showing the evolution of their thinking and approach. And presumably, much of this documentation would be time-stamped and verifiable, showing when specific insights were developed and implemented? Exactly. In my case, I have comprehensive documentation going back to my graduate research at MIT, showing how my thinking about neural network optimization evolved over several years. The core insights that enabled the breakthrough I described can be traced through academic papers, conference presentations, and research communications that predate any commercial implementation. Doctor? Hayes set down his pen and looked at me directly. Sarah, I'm going to be frank with you. The technology you're describing sounds remarkably similar to a system I've recently evaluated for potential investment. The performance characteristics, the technical approach, even some of the specific algorithmic details you've mentioned, align almost perfectly with presentations I've seen from another company. My heart began racing, but I maintained my composure. That's interesting, Dr. Hayes. Could you tell me more about this company and their technology claims? The company is called TechFlow Solutions, and they're preparing for an IPO based primarily on the strength of what they call Flow AI. The CEO, David Chen, has been presenting this technology as his own breakthrough innovation, claiming to have developed the core algorithms himself over the past few years. I took a deep breath, knowing that my response to this moment would determine everything that followed. Dr. Hayes, I appreciate your directness, and I think it's time for me to be equally frank with you. The technology that David Chen is claiming to have developed, I created it. Every algorithm, every optimization technique, every mathematical insight that makes Flow AI revolutionary came from my research and implementation work. The silence that followed felt like it lasted forever, though it was probably only a few seconds. Dr. Hayes studied my face carefully, clearly evaluating my credibility and considering the implications of what I had just told him. That's an extremely serious allegation, Sarah. Are you saying that David Chen has misrepresented his role in developing Flow AI? I'm saying that David Chen had virtually no involvement in developing Flow AI beyond providing general business requirements and approving resource allocation. I designed the algorithms, I wrote the code, I solved the mathematical challenges, I debugged the implementation, and I optimized the performance. David's contributions were limited to strategic guidance and management oversight. Dr. Hayes was quiet for a long moment, processing the information I had shared. Sarah, if what you're telling me is accurate, this represents a fundamental misrepresentation of the intellectual property underlying TechFlow's valuation. The investment thesis for the company is based entirely on David's technical innovation and expertise. I understand the implications, Dr. Hayes. That's why I wanted to speak with you directly. The IPO that TechFlow is planning is based on fraudulent claims about the origins of their core technology. Investors deserve to know the truth about who actually developed the algorithms that make Flow AI possible. Do you have documentation supporting your claims? Evidence that demonstrates your role in developing this technology? I had been hoping he would ask exactly that question. I have extensive documentation spanning several years, starting with my graduate research at MIT and continuing through my work at TechFlow. I can provide mathematical proofs, algorithm specifications, code, commits, design documents, and email communications that clearly establish my authorship of the core innovations. Dr. Hayes leaned back in his chair, clearly working through the complexity of the situation I had described. Sarah, these are very serious allegations that could have significant legal and financial implications. Before we continue this conversation, I need to understand your motivations. Why are you sharing this information with me now? The question was fair and important. My answer would determine whether Dr. Hayes saw me as a credible whistleblower or a disgruntled former employee seeking revenge. Dr. Hayes, I was fired from TechFlow 3 weeks ago after I challenged David's claims about developing Flow AI during your technical due diligence visit. When I provided detailed answers to your technical questions, demonstrating knowledge that David couldn't match, he terminated my employment rather than risk further exposure of his deception. You were present during my due diligence visit to TechFlow. Yes, I was included in the technical presentations at David's request. When you asked specific questions about the mathematical foundations of Flow AI, David was unable to answer with authority, so he deferred to me. I provided the technical details you were seeking, making it clear that I possessed intimate knowledge of the algorithm's development. Dr. Hayes nodded slowly. I remember that presentation. There was definitely tension in the room, and it was obvious that the technical expertise was not evenly distributed among the team members. David's answers to my questions were quite general, while yours were remarkably specific and sophisticated. Exactly. After you left, David fired me for what he called undermining his credibility and attempting to sabotage the investment process. But I wasn't sabotaging anything. I was simply answering your technical questions honestly. And now you're concerned that TechFlow will proceed with their IPO based on misrepresentations about the technology's origins? I'm concerned that investors will commit hundreds of millions of dollars to a company whose primary asset was developed by someone who is no longer with the organization and receives no credit for her work. More importantly, I'm concerned about the technical vulnerabilities in Flow AI that David's team doesn't understand because they didn't develop the system themselves. This was the perfect moment to introduce the race condition vulnerability. That could destroy TechFlow's valuation. Dr. Hayes, during my presentation today, I mentioned race conditions and optimization routines that only manifest under enterprise-scale deployment. Flow AI has exactly this vulnerability. The current implementation works perfectly under moderate load conditions, but will fail catastrophically when deployed at the scale that a post-IPO company would be targeting. Dr. Hayes straightened in his chair, clearly understanding the II implications. You're saying that Flow AI has a critical technical flaw that could cause system failures after the IPO? I'm saying that Flow AI has a race condition in its neural network optimization routine that I discovered during final development, but didn't have time to fix before my termination. David's team is unaware of this vulnerability because they don't understand the mathematical foundations of the optimization algorithms well enough to identify such issues. And this vulnerability would cause problems specifically under high load conditions? Exactly. The race condition is triggered by a specific combination of input complexity and processing volume that wouldn't be encountered during typical development testing or limited customer deployments. But once TechFlow scales to serve thousands of enterprise customers processing massive data volumes, the vulnerability will inevitably surface. Dr. Hayes was writing rapidly in his notebook, clearly recognizing the significance of what I was telling him. Sarah, if TechFlow proceeds with their IPO without understanding or addressing this vulnerability, the consequences could be devastating for investors and customers. That's exactly why I felt compelled to speak with you. This isn't just about getting credit for my work, though that's certainly important to me personally. This is about preventing a situation where investors commit significant capital to a company that's built on misrepresented technology with hidden technical flaws. What would it take to fix this race condition vulnerability? Someone with deep understanding of the optimization algorithms could probably fix it in a few hours. But that would require David's team to first acknowledge that the vulnerability exists, then find someone with the mathematical expertise to understand the root cause and implement a proper solution. Given their current technical capabilities, I estimate it would take them months to even identify the issue, assuming they ever do. Dr. Hayes set down his pen and looked at me directly. Sarah, I need to ask you a difficult question. If this vulnerability is as serious as you describe, and if you're the only person who fully understands how to fix it, why haven't you warned TechFlow about the issue? Regardless of your personal grievances with David, don't you have some obligation to prevent the technical disaster you're describing? The question cut to the heart of the ethical dilemma I had been wrestling with for weeks. Dr. Hayes, I did try to address technical issues during my employment at TechFlow, but my input was consistently dismissed or ignored. David and his leadership team made it clear that they weren't interested in my technical opinions, only in my ability to implement their directives. When I attempted to engage in substantive technical discussions, I was told to focus on coding rather than questioning architectural decisions. I paused to gather my thoughts before continuing. After my termination, I considered reaching out to warn them about the vulnerability, but I realized that doing so would likely be seen as an attempt to extort my way back into the company. Given the circumstances of my firing and the confidentiality agreements I'm bound by, any communication from me would probably be dismissed as vindictive rather than constructive. Dr. Hayes nodded thoughtfully. So you decided to bring this information to me instead, knowing that I have both the technical background to understand the implications and the financial stake to take appropriate action. Exactly. You have the credibility and authority to investigate these issues properly, and you have a fiduciary responsibility to your investors to ensure that your technical due diligence is based on accurate information. I'm providing you with the information. You need to make an informed decision about TechFlow's investment worthiness. Sarah, what you're describing amounts to investment fraud if David is knowingly misrepresenting his role in developing Flow AI. But it's also possible that he genuinely believes his contributions were more significant than you're suggesting. How confident are you that his claims are deliberately deceptive rather than simply mistaken? This was a crucial distinction that could affect how Dr. Hayes responded to my allegations. Dr. Hayes, I can provide you with specific examples of David's deliberate misrepresentation. During investor presentations, he has described technical challenges and breakthrough moments using language that is lifted directly from my documentation and research notes. He has claimed credit for solving specific mathematical problems that I know he has never understood, much less worked on personally. I continued with concrete examples. David has published articles about AI innovation that plagiarize insights and anecdotes from my development experience, rewritten as if he had lived through them himself. He has filed patent applications listing himself as the primary inventor of algorithms that he has never seen the source code for. These aren't innocent mistakes or differences of perspective about collaborative work. They are calculated appropriations of someone else's intellectual achievements. Dr. Hayes was taking detailed notes as I provided specific examples of David's deception. And you have documentation that would support these claims about plagiarism and false attribution? I have extensive documentation, including time-stamped research notes, email communications, code commits, and mathematical proofs that establish a clear timeline of my contributions. I also have records of David's public statements and patent filings that demonstrate his appropriation of my work. Sarah, I appreciate your willingness to share this information with me, but I need to understand the broader context before deciding how to proceed. Are there other people who can corroborate your account of Flow AI's development? Colleagues who witnessed your contributions and can verify your role in creating the technology? This was where Lisa Kim's support during the panel discussion became crucial. Yes, there are several TechFlow employees who worked closely with me on Flow AI and can verify my contributions. Lisa Kim, the junior developer who asked me questions during today's panel, worked directly with me on algorithm implementation and testing. She has firsthand knowledge of my role in developing the system. And would she be willing to provide that verification if asked? I believe so, though I understand that her current employment at TechFlow might create conflicting loyalties. However, her questions during today's panel seem designed to help me establish the timeline and documentation requirements for algorithmic development, which suggests she recognizes the importance of technical accuracy. Dr. Hayes closed his notebook and looked at me with an expression that suggested he was preparing to make important decisions. Sarah, what you've shared with me today raises serious questions about TechFlow's investment worthiness and the integrity of their IPO preparations. I need to conduct additional investigation before determining how to respond. But I want you to know that I take these allegations very seriously. I understand, Dr. Hayes. I'm not asking you to take my word for anything. I'm simply asking you to investigate the technical claims thoroughly and verify the actual origins of Flow AI before committing additional capital to the company. That's exactly what I intend to do. Sarah, would you be willing to provide me with copies of the documentation you mentioned? The research notes, code commits, and other evidence that supports your claims about developing Flow AI? I had been hoping he would make exactly that request. Absolutely. I can provide you with comprehensive documentation that establishes my role in developing the core algorithms. I should mention that much of this documentation predates my employment at TechFlow, showing that the foundational insights came from my independent research rather than company-directed work. That's particularly important from an intellectual property perspective. If the core innovations originated from your independent research, TechFlow's ownership claims become much more questionable. Exactly. While TechFlow may own the specific SOAR implementation I created while employed there, they cannot legitimately claim ownership of the underlying mathematical insights and algorithmic approaches that make Flow AI revolutionary. Dr. Hayes stood up, signaling that our conversation was reaching its conclusion. Sarah, I want to thank you for bringing this information to my attention. Regardless of how this situation resolves, you've provided valuable insights about technical due diligence and the importance of verifying intellectual property claims. But as we shook hands, I felt a mixture of relief and anxiety about what would happen next. I had successfully shared my story with someone who had both the expertise to understand its implications and the authority to take meaningful action. But I also knew that challenging David's narrative would likely trigger significant retaliation, potentially affecting my future career prospects in Austin's tech community. Dr. Hayes, I hope you understand that coming forward with this information represents a significant risk for me personally. David has considerable influence in Austin's startup ecosystem, and challenging his credibility could have serious consequences for my professional future. I understand completely, Sarah. I want to assure you that any investigation I conduct will be handled with appropriate discretion, and I will take steps to protect your interests throughout the process. As Dr. Hayes walked away, I noticed Lisa Kim approaching from across the convention center lobby. She had clearly been waiting for my conversation to conclude, and her expression suggested she had something important to discuss. Sarah, I hope you don't mind me waiting to speak with you, Lisa said as she reached my table. I wanted to thank you for your presentation today. It was incredibly insightful. Thank you, Lisa. I appreciated your questions during the panel discussion. They helped me address some important points about algorithmic development and documentation. Lisa glanced around to ensure we weren't being overheard, then leaned closer. Sarah, I need you to know that I've been documenting everything since you left TechFlow. I have records of the technical discussions we had during Flow AI's development, copies of the code commits that show your contributions, and notes from meetings where you explained complex algorithmic concepts to the team. Her words were exactly what I needed to hear. Lisa, why are you telling me this? Because what David is doing is wrong, and I can't stand by and watch him steal credit for your work. I may be just a junior developer, but I know the difference between someone who creates breakthrough technology and someone who takes credit for it. Are you willing to provide that documentation if it becomes necessary to verify my claims about developing Flow AI? Lisa nodded firmly. Absolutely. I've been keeping copies of everything on my personal devices, outside of TechFlow systems. I figured someday the truth would need to come out, and I wanted to make sure there was evidence to support it. Lisa, you realize that supporting my claims could put your job at risk? I understand the risks, Sarah. But some things are more important than job security. What David is doing isn't just wrong, it's fraud. He's about to make hundreds of millions of dollars by claiming credit for work that you did. That's not something I can ignore. Our conversation was interrupted by the sound of my phone buzzing with an incoming call. I glanced at the screen and felt my stomach drop when I saw the caller ID, Marcus Thompson, TechFlow's CTO. I need to take this call, I told Lisa, stepping away from the table for privacy. Sarah, where the hell are you? Marcus's voice was sharp with anger and concern. David just got a call from someone at the conference asking detailed questions about Flow AI's development timeline and technical authorship. He wants to know if you've been talking to investors behind our backs. So Dr. Hayes had wasted no time beginning his investigation. Marcus, I attended a tech conference where I participated in a panel discussion about AI development. That's not talking to investors behind anyone's back. Cut the crap, Sarah. David knows you've been spreading lies about Flow AI's development, trying to undermine the company and sabotage our IPO. He's considering legal action for breach of confidentiality and interference with business relationships. The threat didn't surprise me, but hearing it stated so directly still sent a chill down my spine. I haven't breached any confidentiality agreements, Marcus. I discussed general principles of neural network optimization without revealing any proprietary TechFlow information. David doesn't see it that way. He says you've been claiming credit for work that belongs to the company, making statements that could damage our relationships with investors. What I've been doing is telling the truth about who actually developed Flow AI. If that damages TechFlow's investor relationships, perhaps that says something about the sustainability of David's narrative. Marcus was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke again, his tone had shifted from angry to almost pleading. Sarah, you need to stop this. David is furious, and he has the resources to make your life very difficult. Why can't you just move on and find a new job? Why do you have to destroy everything we've built? The question revealed so much about Marcus's fundamental misunderstanding of the situation. Marcus, I'm not trying to destroy anything. I'm trying to prevent a fraud that will hurt innocent investors and damage Austin's tech reputation. David is about to take a company public based on lies about intellectual property ownership. That's not how David sees it. He believes his strategic vision and leadership were essential to Flow AI's development, and that gives him legitimate claim to the innovation. Strategic vision doesn't write code, Marcus. Leadership doesn't solve mathematical optimization problems. David can claim credit for managing the project, for providing resources, for creating market opportunities. But he cannot claim credit for developing algorithms that he has never understood. The conversation continued for several more minutes, but it became clear that Marcus was going to support David regardless of the technical evidence. Their friendship and professional relationship was more important to him than acknowledging the truth about Flow AI's authorship. After hanging up, I returned to Lisa, who had been waiting patiently for my conversation to conclude. "That was Marcus," I explained. "David knows that I've been talking to investors about Flow AI's development, and he's threatening legal action." Lisa's expression hardened with determination. "Then we need to make sure the evidence is preserved and protected. Sarah, I think there are other people at TechFlow who would support your version of events if they weren't afraid of retaliation." "What do you mean?" "I mean that you weren't the only person who contributed to Flow AI's development. There were other engineers who worked on implementation, other researchers who provided input, other team members who witnessed your leadership of the technical work. David's narrative only works if everyone stays silent about what they actually observed." This was an important insight that I hadn't fully considered. While David had successfully intimidated Marcus and Jennifer into supporting his version of events, there might be other TechFlow employees who were uncomfortable with his appropriation of my work. "Lisa, are you suggesting that we try to organize some kind of collective response to David's claims?" "I'm suggesting that the truth has more supporters than David realizes, and that those supporters might be willing to speak up if they knew they weren't alone." The idea was intriguing, but also dangerous. Organizing a group of current TechFlow employees to challenge David's narrative would almost certainly be seen as conspiracy and insubordination, potentially leading to widespread terminations and legal retaliation. But it might also be the only way to generate enough corroborating evidence to conclusively establish the truth about Flow AI's development. Dr. Hayes had asked for verification of my claims and a coordinated statement from multiple TechFlow employees who had witnessed my work would be far more compelling than my individual allegations. "Lisa, I appreciate your willingness to support me, but I don't want to put other people's jobs at risk. What David is doing is wrong, but that doesn't mean everyone else should sacrifice their careers to expose him. Sarah, some of us care more about doing the right thing than protecting our paychecks, and some of us are tired of watching David take credit for other people's work while treating the actual contributors like disposable resources." Her words suggested that David's appropriation of my work was part of a broader pattern of taking credit for his employees' contributions. If that was the case, then my situation might resonate with other TechFlow workers who had experienced similar treatment. "Let me think about this, Lisa. The approach would need to be carefully planned to minimize risks for everyone involved." "Of course. But Sarah, time is not on our side. David is moving quickly with the IPO preparations, and once that process reaches a certain point, it will become much harder to stop or reverse." She was right about the timeline. Dr. Hayes' investigation would take time, and David would undoubtedly use that time to shore up his defenses and prepare counter-arguments. If I was going to build a comprehensive case for my authorship of Flow AI, I needed to act quickly to gather evidence and support. As Lisa and I parted ways, I felt a renewed sense of purpose and possibility. My conversation with Dr. Hayes had been successful in raising serious questions about TechFlow's IPO, and Lisa's offer of support suggested that I might not be as isolated in this fight as I had assumed. But I also knew that David would not accept these challenges passively. Marcus's phone call had made it clear that TechFlow's leadership was prepared to use legal threats and professional retaliation to silence opposition. The next phase of this conflict would require careful strategy and significant courage from everyone involved. Walking out of the convention center into the warm Austin evening, I pulled out my phone and began composing an email to Dr. Hayes with the comprehensive documentation he had requested. The message would include mathematical proofs, algorithm specifications, code commits, research timelines, and academic publications that established my authorship of the innovations that made Flow AI possible. But more importantly, it would include specific technical details about the race condition vulnerability that threatened to destroy TechFlow's valuation once the system was deployed at scale. David Chen was about to learn that stealing someone's work was easy, but understanding it well enough to fix its problems was an entirely different challenge. The war for truth and justice was just beginning. But for the first time since my termination, I felt like I had the weapons and allies necessary to win. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.